Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Speaker tonight is Ron W. Thank you, sir. Hello, my name is Ronald White, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to start off by thanking Phil and the Speaker Committee and this Convention Committee, Jim, and all the other members of the committee for giving me the privilege of being able to come and share with you at this particular convention. I had the honor and privilege of being asked by Ben and his committee to speak at the first annual convention. I was supposed to be the banquet speaker at that convention. Now, some people may be saying, well, why are you here, 2 out of 3 years? You must not have been at the first convention if you're asking that question. Because for those of you who don't know, there was this big bomb scare on the night of the banquet. And so this is my first time being able to speak. And I am so grateful that the committee saw fit to ask me to come back here to speak. And I learned so much from watching Ben and all the people who worked so diligently in that other convention, to see how they walked through that and to see how they overcame all the difficulties that came out of that. And to be asked to come back here again, I felt a little strange. I think they thought I was the jinx, because they asked me to speak at the opening meeting this time instead of the banquet. They said, we're not going to mess that up again, So after all, it's all about me, right? But I want to thank everybody who walked up to me before this meeting began, who saw me earlier at Vince, who was my wife and I's host, and a lot of my friends who have come up to me to welcome me here. It's always an honor, as I said before, to speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I need to let anybody who might be a newcomer to Alcoholics Anonymous who sits in this room tonight know that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous works. I know that it works because I've been clean and sober one day at a time since July the 14th of 1986. I know that I don't look that old. I got sober when I was 12. But I was very fortunate enough to celebrate my 20th birthday this past July. And I am just blown away by the miracle that is Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I need to let the new man or woman know that I like to share, as the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous suggests that I do, in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today. And I know it says I should share it like that because there is something that happens when one alcoholic shares with another that doesn't happen when anybody else tries to share with us. I remember my mother, who I love dearly, would try to nurse me back to health after I would come off one of those runs, and we'd sit around and she would feed me and clean me up, and we'd sit and we'd cry and hold hands and pray, and she would ask me, Ronnie, what happened? You said you wouldn't do this again. What happened? And she just don't know. With everything in me, I wish I knew what had happened. That there was nothing that she could say, nor feel, nor explain what happened to me that I did not even understand. That how when I got paid, I meant to come home with the money. How when I was walking home, I got off that bus, and I'm coming and I'm walking, and I'm coming by that liquor store and my feet just seem to walk into the liquor store. Try to explain that to somebody who's never felt the obsession. Try to explain that to somebody who's never felt what I felt. Try to explain that to another alcoholic who hasn't gotten sober. But when I got here, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, there were some men and women sharing from podiums just like this one, who were able to share with me what they used to be like. And I understood. I identified. And I know it's real fashionable to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous nowadays and hear people say, I'm not going to stay in a drunk-a-log grill. We all know what it's like to drink, right? You know, I want to get into the work. I want to talk about the steps to get into recovery. And I know that's important, but I know if somebody had just been talking about the steps when I got here as a newcomer, you would have lost me. Because when I was here brand new, that hour and a half seemed so long. And I could hardly understand what the speaker was talking about, right? You know, if they were a lot of times it was just noise, and a lot of times it was just, I would catch snatches of it, you know, and it was, man, I was messed up when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to dress up when I speak at meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because I had a sponsor early on that told me, Ronald, you know something? The way that you look might be the only thing that a newcomer might remember. They might not remember what you shared, but they might remember the speaker looked good. He told me that if you're going to speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, you should at least look sober. That might be the, right? You know, I mean, I know it's not an outside job, and I know it's not just about dressing up the outsides, because you see, the way that I look tonight might not be particularly important to you if you don't hear what I used to be like. That's why I share that, because if we come in and you just think, look at this lame, he look, I mean, I think I look kind of nice. Yeah. You know, I got, right? You know, this beautiful, I'm going to describe it for the people on the tape. You know, I'm wearing this beautiful black suit, a burgundy with black stripes shirt, beautifully coordinated silk tie, you know, my shoes, these beautiful boots, they're matching one another. I don't have any tape on my glasses. You know, I'm about 6'4". I got this blonde hair, this Nordic. Oh, okay, all right. I guess you guys laughing a little too hard now. Yeah. They know on the tape I must have veered off center a little bit. But you know, somebody who's new might look at me tonight and I'm smiling and I look kind of nice, and they may be thinking, what can this lame share with me that I can identify with? I'm hurt. I'm feeling lost and alone. I'm sitting my butt up in a recovery home or in some shelter somewhere. And what can he say that I can relate to? And I know it's important that I share what I used to be like. I need to let you know that when I arrived on the doorstep of Alcoholics Anonymous, I wasn't wearing no nice black suit. I was wearing a pair of gray corduroy pants. I need to let you know where I was when I arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous. I was standing in the lobby of a joint called the Harbor Light Center. It's a place run by the Salvation Army, located on the Nickel, 5th Street, Skid Row, in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. The Salvation Army's Harbor Light Center was an all-men's alcoholic recovery center. It housed 150 beds for men. As I stood in the lobby of that place, I was being interviewed, and I'm not talking about a job interview. I'm talking about an intake interview. One of those interviews they give you when they're seeing if they're going to give you a bed to get into the recovery facility. As they were asking me those questions they ask you to see if I was going to get in that recovery facility, I remember the guy was asking me, Mr. White, how much do you drink? And what do you drink? And I remember as the guy was asking me those questions, that counselor, the advocate, they called him. He was asking me these questions, and I remember I was mumbling my answers as I was looking at these dirty, run-over tennis shoes that I was wearing that had holes inside them. I was looking at these tennis shoes because my chin felt like it were stapled to my chest. because I was so ashamed of being there, I couldn't even look this man in the eye. And as I was mumbling my answers, hoping desperately that they would give me a bed, I remember I was wearing these gray corduroy pants. And the pants were real dusty and dirty because I'd been wearing them for 3 or 4 days on a run. If I had hit the pants too hard, a cloud of smoke would have filled up the lobby because I had been just... I had a gray t-shirt on that was matching those pants. It wasn't supposed to be matching those pants. It wasn't supposed to be gray, but it was real slick and greasy and oily because I had been wearing it the same amount of time I was wearing those pants. And the pants were kind of like hanging off of me. You know how the youngsters have a style of dress nowadays, right? You know, they call it sagging, right? They do it on purpose, right? And I hate it, right? You know, and they're showing the underwear and the pants are like, you know, well, that wasn't the style back in '86. And I wasn't a youngster. I was 31 years old, but I'm an alcoholic. When I drink, I don't eat. So imagine me 40 pounds lighter than I am tonight. That's right. I'm a small guy anyway. Drop 40 off me. I was skeletal. I look like one of those kids you see on those commercials for famine in Africa. Cheeks sunk in, eyes popping out my head. I remember I had a big black overcoat on that I wore everywhere that I went because I didn't want you to see how skinny, how malnourished I was. Like you wouldn't notice the coat, right? It was Los Angeles. In LA, 90 degrees. It was July, right? July the 14th. And I'm not talking about no nice, fashionable, you know, top coat, you know, no London fog or cashmere. You know, one of those seedy-looking, Chester the Molester-looking coats, right? I had a baseball cap pulled tightly on my head because by now I have no personal hygiene. I've stopped combing my hair. My hair is all matted on my head. I had a big black pair of plastic county rim glasses on. That's what we call the kind of glasses you get from the county. Not no nice little wireframe fashion, you know, look. I'm talking about those big glasses that you have. And I had a big piece of white tape wrapped up on one of the arms, holding them together, because a guy had pistol whooped me a couple of months before and broke them for not following directions. And I remember I stank so bad. I had this stench about me. You know that smell that we get when we haven't bathed for weeks on end? You know, I would get in people's cars and they would have to roll the windows down and drive with their head poked out the window. If you get the opportunity to shake my hand or give me a hug at the conclusion of this meeting, I want you to take a whiff. I have a nice little fragrance on tonight, something called Issey Miyake. Issey Miyake, shit, it was pissy me, you know, if you had smelled me that day. And I wasn't laughing about my condition as I stood in the Harbor Light Center that morning, hoping that they would give me a bed. There was nothing funny about the way that I felt that morning. I never had any dreams nor aspirations about landing at the Harbor Light Center at the age of 31, begging them for a bed. I never dreamed or had any goals about becoming a drunk when I grew up. In fact, to the contrary, I thought that I would never be an alcoholic because the first resentment I ever grew up with was against my father because my father was a drunk. I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles by my mother and father, and I have 5 brothers. There's 6 boys in my family. We had a little 2-bedroom apartment. My mother and father stayed in 1 bedroom, and my brothers and I crowded together in that other small bedroom. And I remember my father would always come home from work smelling like cheap wine. Ripple was his beverage of choice. This cheap wine they used to make back in the 50s. I remember he would get paid on Fridays and he never seemed to be able to make it home until Sunday. Every time he dragged his butt home, he was always broke. When he would come into the house, my mother would ask him, "Ralph, what happened? We've got all these boys to feed. What happened to you?" And I remember he would mumble something you couldn't understand, or he would curse my mother out like she had done something wrong. And when he cussed my mother out, he made her cry. And I remember when he made my mother cry, I looked at him with hatred. I hated him for being so weak. I hated him for being such a punk, for being a drunk, for not loving us enough to bring home the money. I hated him for being an alcoholic. And I swore when I grew up that I would never grow up to be like him. And I swore I would never drink. And so for the first 18 years of my life, I never drank anything. But you know something? Even while growing up not drinking, I had these feelings, the thinking that I've come to associate as the ism of alcoholism. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the very front portion of that book, they have a section called The Doctor's Opinion, where this world-famous doctor, Dr. William Silkworth, worked with the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he wrote a letter that we've included in our book. And he wrote in that letter that he had studied thousands of alcoholics. And he said after studying them, he noticed they had certain things in common. One of the things he said was that he believed that they had an allergy to alcohol, that they seemed to crave more when they drank. But that wasn't what interested me when I first read the doctor's opinion, because he wrote something else. He said these alcoholics, when not drinking, seemed to suffer from feelings of being irritable, restless, and discontent, that they didn't feel at ease with themselves. And I identified with that. Even before I started drinking, I felt dis-ease. I never felt comfortable in my skin. I never liked who I was. I always hated being so damn short. See, they're even laughing about it today. See, it's, you know. I've always had little man's complex. I've hit the growth spurt. I'm not going to grow anymore. I'm 51. This is it. What you see is what you get. I'm 5'4" and a half, and that's right, a half. Still grown, right? Talking about a half. I've always had that complex about being so little. Could never find girls that I could, they always had heels. Even if they were my height, they were taller because they got to wear heels and stuff. And I've always felt less than because of that. I've always been a small kid. I've always been real thin. And in my neighborhood, the boys judged each other's self-worth by how athletically inclined you were, by how physically gifted you were. And I was never good at sports. I was always too short, too little. I could never hit a baseball real far or shoot hoops or throw a football real good. And we would play these pickup games around my house. We used to live behind this alley. And we never had organized sports teams, so we played pickup games, right? All the boys would get together, and we made the best two athletes always have to be on opposite teams. And all the other boys would crowd around in a circle, and they would take turns picking, right? And they'd say, okay, I'll take Ben, and I'll take Phil, and they would always get to the end, and it was always me and some fat guy. And somebody would say, all right, I'll take Ronnie. And they don't know how that made me feel. The way that they said that. Like I was a burden. Like I was a leftover. And I felt less than. I've always hated being so black. And I don't mean being black, but damn, it's so black. Even black people discriminated against me. It was like, You know, I grew up in the 50s and in the 60s, and in my own race, we judged how good you look by your skin tone, your skin complexion. And the lighter your skin was, the more handsome you were considered, or the more pretty you were considered if you were a girl. And I mean, I never wanted to be white. I just wanted to be high yellow, with good hair, right? Just like. So even in my own race, I felt less than. I've always hated wearing glasses. I've worn glasses since I was in the 2nd grade. And you guys, you know those names you called me? Four Eyes, Poindexter, Mr. Peabody, the Professor. And I couldn't stand it. I could go on for the rest of this meeting describing to you the things that I felt about myself that made me feel less than. Hated having a drunk of a father. My mother put him out the house when I was 9 because she was tired of him dragging us down, and then I hated him not being there. You can't really please an alcoholic, I've learned from looking on my own experience, because change my condition and I will hate whatever I've been changed to, right? And so I've grown up feeling dis-ease. Oh, shoot, I needed a drink when I was growing up, because I needed to change the way that I felt. But I couldn't drink because I didn't want to become like my father. And I had to find something. I had to find something to help me change the way that I felt. And the thing that I found while growing up that helped me get out of myself were books. I became addicted to reading. Because when I read, I escaped. Libraries became my sanctuary. I used to love checking out the maximum number of books you could check out from the library and running home and just disappearing into the pages of these novels. Because when I read, man, I was no longer on 108th and Central in South Central LA in the middle of Watts. I was transported to distant lands. I used to love spy novels. I would become the hero in those books because they were just the opposite of who I was. They were tall, dark, and handsome. Well, I had 1 out of 3, they were suave and debonair, right? They were exciting and rich. And I remember I used to love becoming the character in these books. But even looking back on the way that I read, I understand the disease I suffer from, alcoholism, centers in my thinking, and it's progressive in nature. And anything I've ever latched onto in my life that I've ever used to help me get out of myself, after a few years of using it, it doesn't have the same effect. And I seem to require more, something stronger, something quicker, something faster. And after a few years of reading those library books, man, they didn't work for me anymore. And I needed something that was quicker and stronger. And I discovered comic books, because the stories were even shorter, and the heroes were even more grandiose and powerful. And they were a line of comics made by a company called DC. They made Superman and Batman and the Flash, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, the Atom, Hawkman, the Justice League of America, the Legion of Superheroes. And I became a superhero named Monel. I would go in my mother's closet, I would grab a towel, and I would tie the towel around my neck, and that towel became a cape. And I would go out on 108th Street, and I would get a running start, and I would run, and I would jump, and I would fly down 108th Street. Now, I don't know if y'all know anything about Watts. In the 60s, it was one of the toughest cities in the world. And imagine this little skinny kid with the towel around his neck, running down the street at full speed with my eyes clenched shut and my arms outstretched. But I didn't feel any fear when I did that. Because when I put on that towel, when I put on that cape, it made me feel strong. It made me feel heroic. It made me feel powerful. And even back then, lack of power was my dilemma. And it made me feel what I needed to feel. Unfortunately, however, my disease is progressive, and after a few years of reading those comic books, I didn't get the same effect, and I needed something else. And my family purchased a small little black and white television, and I fell in love. They used to nickname me the human TV guide. I would be glued to the television, and my brothers would play a game. Neighbors would come by, and they would say, "Hey, man, watch this. Ronnie, Wednesday, 8 o'clock. And without moving, I'd say, 8 o'clock? Oh, Channel 2 is Gunsmoke. Channel 4 is Mannix. Channel 5 is Donna Reed. Channel 7... I could tell you whatever was on any channel, any time of the day, any day of the week. Thank God they didn't have cable. Woo! I would have been messed up. More, there was one television show that I gravitated to that later became one of the guiding forces in my life. The name of the show was Perry Mason. Perry Mason was a criminal defense attorney played by an actor named Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr was one of the handsomest guys I had ever seen on television. Now, I'm not talking about the Raymond Burr in his later years when they started making the TV movies of Perry Mason. I'm talking about the old black and white series when his hair was jet black and it was slicked back going back, and he had these broad shoulders, and he had these beautiful black suits that he used. I think they were black. It was black and white television. So, dark suits that he wore. And he had a command and a presence about him as he walked around the courtroom. And I don't know if you remember Raymond Burr's eyes. He had these dark, piercing eyes. And Perry would walk around the courtroom, and it got near the end of the episode, and he'd have a witness on the witness stand, right? And they'd be fidgeting, and they'd get nervous and start to sweat a little bit. You knew what was going to happen, right? It happened every week, but he would always close in, and he would just say, "Isn't it true?" And yes! Or somebody in the back of the courtroom would jump up, "I did it." What? It was amazing. I don't think a case ever went to the jury. Right? It was just like dismissed at preliminary hearing, right? You know, it's just like, wow, that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be Perry Mason because Perry had power. He had the ultimate power, the power to bend people's will to his simply by the force of his presence and his words. And I thought, maybe I could do that. Perry wasn't a superhero in a comic book. He didn't have to wear a cape. He wasn't somebody in a novel that I was reading about, man. He was a real person. I could see him on the television. And I thought, maybe I could do that. So I grew up wanting to be Perry Mason. I wanted to be a lawyer. As I grew up coming through school, I was a straight A student because my addiction to reading made me ready-made for the classroom. I was the most articulate student in all my classes. I could read. I read better than anybody else. The teacher would always call on me to, I was one of the original nerds, right? I was, me. I was always armload of books, glasses, and, that's me, right? When I got to high school, I went to a high school in South Central Los Angeles called Locke High School. We had a world-famous marching band called the Locke High Marching Saints. I was a member of that band. I played the trombone, and I marched in what they called the front rank, the very first line. And we marched in the Rose Parade, and we went and raised money and went to a parade in Hawaii called the Aloha Parade. I remember I was voted my senior class president. I remember I was on the honor roll, and I got accepted to go to college on a full scholarship to Loyola University. It was then Loyola University and Marymount College, and then they later merged. And I remember you would have thought with all of these accomplishments and things I had in my life, I should have been happy, right? I should have been proud to be Ronald White. But you know something? I am like most alcoholics. I am never satisfied with the things that I have. It always seems that the things that I have don't have the same value as the things that you have. The grass always appears to be greener on the other side to me. My glass is never half full, it's always half empty. While I was accomplishing these things academically, I never wanted to be a bookworm. I never wanted to be at the top of the list. I wanted to be like those athletes, the guys scoring touchdowns. They would write about them in the newspapers. Or those guys we used to call the lovers. You know, they would hang out in the bathroom smoking weed and smoking cigarettes. Never going to class. Always hanging around in twos or threes of them, just, you know, kicking back, leaning against the wall with their hands in their pockets, jiggling their change. Looking so cool, right? Girls would walk by and they'd say, "Hey, baby, that's good. And the girl would giggle just like that, right? And I'd always say, "What did they say? What did they say?" I never knew what to say to make a girl laugh like that, right? I mean, I have lived my life always wanting to be somebody else. I remember I would go to these dances. We would have these noon dances where they would turn out and put on those red lights or those blue lights, and they would have these records come on at the end of the dance, these slow records, so that all the guys and girls could get together and be slow dancing. And I remember, man, I was so full of fear. They had a group out at the time, I remember it, called the Dells. And the Dells had put out a record called Stay in My Corner. And Stay in My Corner was a long, slow record. And I remember when they would put on this record, Stay in My Corner, I'd be staying in my corner. Because I fear rejection so much. And I have this overinflated sense of pride and ego that I'm so afraid of what you're going to think about me when you see her, not if she'll say no, when she says no to me, that I will reject myself before I give you the chance. And that's the way I live my life, full of fear, always pretending like I was better than you, while on the inside I've always felt less than. My 12th grade class gave a graduation party. There was a beach party. And it was a night beach party, and they had set these trash cans on fire to light up the beach to make it look so romantic. And I remember I'm walking along the beach by myself with a can of soda, the professor, and I saw this guy and this girl underneath a blanket. And as I looked at the blanket was moving. And I passed by and I heard the girl say, "Ooh." Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to get underneath a blanket, right? But everybody knows the professor doesn't get underneath blankets, right? And somebody was passing around something. I wish I remember what it was because it became my first drink. It was either some Tyrolia or some Spinata. You know, real high-class stuff. Cheap wine. They used to make in these jugs, right, that you could chug-a-lug. Because you see, by now, my thinking told me that I could take a drink, get underneath a blanket, and I'd never become like my father. My ego told me, your daddy was a high school dropout. You a success story out of the ghetto, accepted to go to college on a full scholarship. You're smarter than he is. My father was a janitor, a custodian. I'm going to be the next Perry Mason, my head told me. I'm going to be a lawyer. You're better than your daddy. You could take a drink and you'll never become like him. And so my thinking told me that I could drink. And so I did. Probably only another alcoholic will understand the effect produced in me by alcohol when it worked in the beginning. Alcohol made me feel taller. It made me feel bigger. It made me feel cool. I don't know about you guys, but alcohol worked. It made me be able to do everything I had ever dreamed about doing in my head, and now I was able to do it. I hear people share in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous that their best day of drinking wasn't as good as their worst day in sobriety. Well, that ain't my story. I had some great times drinking, and that's the rip. My head only wants to remember the good times. It never wants to remember the last days. The nature of my disease is that I have amnesia when it comes to thinking about what it did to me. I can only remember what it did for me. And in the beginning, man, it did everything for me I needed for it to do. It freed me from every fear and inhibition that I had ever grown up with. I remember, excuse me, I don't like to curse when I pitch and everything, but I need to use one word to describe to you the change affected in me when I started drinking. Before I started drinking, I would try to curse people out, and I would say, "Oh, you motherfucker." That was about the effect I got. So it wasn't very intimidating. After I started drinking, yeah, motherfucker. It worked. It did everything for me that I needed for it to do. It made me feel like I was a part of a fellowship of men and women who shared their experience, strength, and drinks with each other. And I had found the fellowship that I craved when drinking in the beginning. I know, man, that if it wasn't for alcohol, alcohol saved me from myself. But unfortunately, I'm an alcoholic. Because somewhere along the line, around my second or third year of drinking, it started doing some things to me. I started off just drinking at parties to be able to dance and to feel good. Now I need to feel good on Monday, too, and on Tuesday. So I'm drinking every day of the week. Now I'm starting to miss classes because I'm staying up all night getting loaded. I don't share about it in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous real detail because I respect the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. But you need to know that my disease is progressive, that I'm a garbage can when I drink, that alcohol opened the door to me doing all kinds of unseemly, unsightly, you know what I'm talking about. My character started to change. I started cheating on my term papers. Hell, I started plagiarizing my term papers. I started buying them from these services that were selling them. We would have exams, and I would write the answers on my cuffs and on my sleeves. I started becoming a liar and a cheat. Things I had never done before I started drinking became doable for me. My morals and my values started to change. And I'm like most alcoholics, I justify my drinking because I have to protect it. And I started using, we had those catchphrases. I used to say, nobody just want to be a bookworm anyway. I want to be a student of life. Had all the catchphrases down to justify my behavior and my drinking. Because after all, that's the thing that saved me, right? That's the thing that freed me until it turned on me like an angry dog. And when it did, I still could not recognize that it was the alcohol that was doing it to me. Because after all, I'm still passing my classes. Maybe I'm not getting A's, maybe it's B's and C's now, but I'm still passing. And I graduated from college on time in 4 years and got accepted to go to law school at a place called Hastings College of the Law, one of the finest law schools in the country, in the city of San Francisco. Anybody who be alcoholic know if you're an alcoholic, you don't need to go to San Francisco. Hastings is located in the section of San Francisco known as the Tenderloin, and it is what it sounds like. A bar on every corner, and I was in love. I went to summer school after my first year of law school, summer school after my second year of law school. I was a law clerk for a drunk where we got drunk every day after work, and I thought that's the way you do it, right? That's the way successful people live. And because I went to summer school after my first and second year of law school, I graduated from law school early, in 2.5 years, earlier than anybody else who had finished it. and they have this test you got to take to become an attorney called the bar exam. And they were giving a test before my graduation was going to take place, when everybody else finished that last semester. And I said, I might as well take it. Nobody passes it the first time, and I'll at least know what it's all about. I took the bar exam, and the results came out on the same day as my graduation. And I'm putting on my cap and gown at my house, my apartment in San Francisco. My best friend came to my house banging on the door, says, Ronald, guess what? They posted the bar results and you passed. And at age 24, I became one of the youngest black attorneys ever licensed to practice law in the state of California. And I was on top of the world. And we drank champagne all night. Because after all, I'm going to be the next Perry Mason. Isn't it true? By the time I'm 30, I'm going to be a millionaire. Unfortunately, my disease is progressive. By the time I was 30, I was not a millionaire. In fact, I did not even have a bank account. I didn't have a nice house on the hill or a condominium or a mansion. I was living back at home with my mother, sleeping on one of her floors. I did not have a job for a law firm on Wilshire and Westwood. The only job I had was carrying out the trash and watering the lawn for a 21-year-old dope dealer who lived across the street from my mother's house. When I would sit on that kid's porch and I would water his lawn, I would see my mother across the street just look over at me and shake her head. And when I was finished watering that kid's lawn, I would go up to his door and I would knock real frantically and I would ask him if he needed anything from the store. This was young Perry Mason. This is the kid who had just passed the bar the first time out just 6 years before. You see, alcohol is no respecter of intellect. It doesn't care if you dropped out from high school or if you graduated from law school. Alcohol does not care if you grew up in Westwood or in Watts. It doesn't care if you're black or if you're white. It doesn't care if you're a man or if you're a woman. It does not care if you're short or if you're tall. Alcohol is an equal opportunity ass kicker. If you suffer from the disease that I suffer from, that is first of all physical in nature, something happens to me when I drink one of anything that does not happen when a normal, non-alcoholic person does it. There is a craving that is created in my body that is unimaginable and unexplainable to you if you've never felt it. It's an itch that can only be scratched by having another one. And that other one creates another itch that has to be scratched. In fact, the itch is so powerful that I will do whatever it takes to get another one. I don't think you heard me. I will do whatever it takes to get another one. That mother who had taken me back into her home when nobody else would have me, who had to have seen her dreams smash when she saw this son she was so proud of come back home as a drunk. This woman who continued to take me back in and feed me and clothe me and nurse me back to health. I was stealing her shoes out her closet because she wore the same size as this girl I could get money from around the corner. I was stealing the food out of my mother's refrigerator to cook plates for people around. My mother had to come home with her food tucked under her arm tightly on a daily basis and hide it under her bed and lock her bedroom door so she would have something to eat. This may not mean much to you, but I need to let you know about my relationship with my mother. I told you she's the person that took me back in. My mother, after making my father leave when I was 9 years old, raised me and my 5 brothers, these 6 boys, by herself, while going to cook and clean for other people's families so that we would never go hungry. She would get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, catch the bus to take care of somebody else's kids, come back and take care of us. We never went hungry. She always had clothes on us. She did this while not having a high school education and put herself back through school and got a diploma, raising 6 boys, going to work, feeding us, and went to school. She didn't stop there. She went back to college at Cal State LA and got a degree in sociology while raising these boys, putting 3 of us into college. And she didn't just stop there. She then got a job for a prestigious insurance company. And she has to come home with her groceries under her arm because the boy that she raised was robbing her to drink. That's what the craving of alcohol will do to me. But that's not the worst part, because the only solution is just don't drink, right? Don't take the first one. You'll never have the craving. There is something about my thinking. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in chapter 3, the chapter called More About Alcoholism, the book describes it as a mental obsession, a thought that overrules all other thoughts, a strange mental quirk. It whispers to me, this time it'll be different. Doesn't always say it like that. Sometimes it says, if you just switch what you drink, if you just switch where you drink, if you just put your money in money orders and mail it back to yourself, if you just give your mama your money to hold, I tell you what, I've got it. Put your drinking money in your front pocket and put the rest in the magic vault, your back pocket. These are thoughts I had before I started. These are the plans I made. I would like to say sober, but I'll say with no alcohol in my system. I remember I would get beat so badly that I would swear I would never do it again. And I would come back home and my mother would bandage me up and I would say, Mama, I'm never going to do that again. And I meant it with all my fiber. And on Monday I wouldn't drink. And on Tuesday I wouldn't drink, and wouldn't drink on Wednesday. And sometime around Thursday my head would say, that ass whooping wasn't that bad. Right? But I didn't drink. Friday would come and we would get paid, and it seemed like I could not even bring to my memory with the force necessary to help me stop. And I would be off to the races again. What is that but a subtle form of insanity? Repeating the same behavior over and over and over. I could keep saying that, y'all. That's how often I did it. And until I could address that sickness, that dis-ease of my spirit that I talked to you about at the beginning of this meeting, until I could address that, I'm still going to seek ease and comfort in that which used to work for me, alcohol, because my head will not accept that it's no longer working. On July the 13th of 1986, a guy gave me some bags of marijuana to sell for him. And I stole his money, and he wanted it back. It was a Sunday, and my mother had just gotten home from church, and I had a bright idea. I said, this guy respects my mother. If I take him into my mother's house and explain to him I don't have his money, he won't do anything to me. I've become a coward. I'm hiding behind my mother. So I take this wolf in my mother's house. And my mother was standing in the kitchen dressed in these beautiful church clothes, getting ready to cook dinner. And I'm trying to explain to this guy in the living room, Kenny, I'm sorry, I don't have your money. And he said, Ronnie, it's fine. Why don't we just step out on the porch and we can make arrangements for you to get me the money back? And I'm thinking, yeah, I got by again. And Kenny steps out on the porch, and I'm walking out behind him, looking back, making sure my mother was close enough for us to see. And Kenny was waiting on me. And when I stepped outside, he must have hit me with everything in his being. And when he hit me, I flew across my mother's yard, and I landed on the grass and rolled over, and he proceeded to run over and kick me and stomp me in the head, trying to kill me. And as Kenny was kicking me and stomping me, I felt as if I were removed from my body watching this happen. And I'm looking at Kenny, and he's kicking me and stomping me, and I looked over and I saw my mother come out the house. And I expected her to say, stop, that's my baby. But she said nothing. And I look back over at Kenny, and he's still kicking me and stomping me. And I look back over at my mother, and she turned around, and she walked back in the house, and she closed the door. And it was at that moment that I experienced step one. That the last human being that I thought I could rely on left me. And I knew that I was hopeless. That I was helpless. The very next day is when I checked into the Harbor Light Center. I'm a real alcoholic. I try to dress it up. I didn't check into the Harbor Light Center. I didn't have reservations. They were not expecting me. Oh, Mr. White? No. I didn't have any luggage. No. I was dropped off at the Harbor Light Center by my oldest brother, Willie, in the state I described to you at the beginning of this meeting, more dead than alive. And they gave me a bed. And I did nothing but eat and sleep for the next 7 days while they detoxed me. And then they started bringing me to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, where I started sitting in the front seats and listening like only a dying person could hear. Because I had been to a recovery home twice in 1985 and relapsed twice. The first time thinking I only had a problem with drugs, forgetting where I got started, and went home on a pass. And my brothers were playing dominoes, and they were drinking Michelob. And my head told me, you never really had a problem with alcohol. And so I drank. And the phenomenon of craving occurred. And I learned through my experience that I was an alcoholic. I went back to that recovery home 30 days later and came home on a pass again. And the local guy I used to water the lawn for said, "Ronald, you don't drink or use?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you can sell this stuff for me." That experiment lasted 20 minutes. When I got to the Harbor Light Center, I didn't go home on any passes. And I listened to the men and women from Alcoholics Anonymous share from podiums just like this one. They shared with me that I would come, and then I would come to, and then I would come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. Step 2 in the program of recovery. And they told me that the solution to the problem that I had to come from a power greater than any human being. It had to be a power greater than me. Had to be a power greater than my mother. Had to be a power greater than any person that I knew. And I said, I know y'all trying to trick, y'all talking about God, huh? And that discouraged me. Because I was raised in the Baptist church. I knew scriptures. I was raised in Sunday school. I knew all that stuff. And it never kept me sober. When I'd been struggling trying to get sober, I would go back to church and I would try to join and rejoin the church and rededicate myself to Christ and do all this kind of stuff. And I always got drunk. And I thought for sure it was only because God had seen the kind of person I had become inside and knew about all the scandalous, low-down things that I'd done out there while drinking and getting the drink. And I knew the God I knew wouldn't want to have nothing to do with me. After all, wasn't the evidence of my life, didn't it show that? And they told me in that book, they said, "We got a chapter for you, Ronald. It's a chapter called We Agnostics, chapter 4. There's a line in that chapter that says, deep inside every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It says that he has sometimes been obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things. But it tells me that if I'm willing to search fearlessly in myself, in the final analysis, it is only there that he can be found, and I got hope. I've spent all my life looking for God, looking for the power in somebody else, looking for him in the sky, looking for him in a preacher, looking for him in my mother. I've never thought to look for the power inside of myself. And they told me, "Ronald, you've always chosen somebody else's conception of God. You need to get a God of your own understanding." And I got hope. And they told me I didn't even have to believe in the beginning. All I needed to do was be willing to believe. And I got the willingness from that ass whooping I took out on the street. It made me be willing to do whatever was necessary for me to stay here. And they told me I had to make a decision. Step 3, to turn my will and my life, my thoughts and my actions over to the care of this power. And I got down on my hands and knees with some men and women in this fellowship. And we held hands and we said the third step prayer together. And I didn't know if it would work for me. I thought, God, what would God want to do with this little raggedy piece of a man that I've become? And I asked God to do something with that piece, to build something out of me, to show anybody else that victory over my difficulties would show the power that He has. And I got hope. When I was in the Harbor Light for 130 days, they sent me to their second phase recovery place, a sober living place called Harmony Hall. Harmony Hall is where they start to transition the men back into real life. You know how you become an animal out on the street. I had to get a driver's license again and a social security card, get a little clothing voucher. You know how we do when we're trying to become human again and to get us a little part-time jobs. I forgot to share with you guys, when I got sober, I thought I'd never be a lawyer again because I thought I'd been disbarred. I've been practicing law illegally for 5 years when I was out there. Never paid my bar dues. I always drank up the money. So I had been practicing law illegally, and I thought I'd been disbarred and I would never be a lawyer again. And the dream I had when I was young had been lost. But when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was so grateful to be sober, I was glad to get whatever work y'all could find me. The first job I found when I was in that sober living was being a bookkeeper for this little old lady who had a nursing home. That might sound fancy to you, let me tell you what I did. I would catch the bus to this lady's house. She would hand me a stack of her bills, and she would take her checkbook, and she would sign a bunch of blank checks. And she told me, Mr. White, I want you to pay all of my bills for me, and I want you to balance my checkbook, and I'll be back in a couple of hours. And she would leave me alone in her house with a bunch of blank signed checks. And I'm 5 months sober. And I'm scared. When that lady came back home 2 hours later, I handed her all of her bills and they were sealed up with checks inside. And I gave her her checkbook, and the book was balanced, and there were no missing checks, and there was nothing missing in her house. And that lady paid me $40 a week to do that job. And when I put that $40 in my pocket, and I caught the bus back to Harmony Hall, I felt 10 feet tall. It had been a long time since anybody had trusted me with anything, and I hadn't burned them. And I knew there was something about that spirit that had gotten so sick when I had started drinking was getting better, and I grew closer to the power. When I was 10 months sober, there was a lady who was bringing in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, panels into our sober living home. And she heard me share about how I was getting kicked out of Harmony Hall because I'd been hiding out there, scared to move back to my mother's house. And they needed the room for somebody who was coming over from Harbor Light. And they told me, Ronald, you ready to go? And I said, no, I'm not. I might drink if I go back home. And this lady, her name was Yvonne. She came up to me after the meeting and she told me, you can move into my apartment and you could sleep on my couch. She had a roommate named Jenny. These two ladies didn't know me from anywhere but a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in a sober living home. And this lady trusted me to move into her apartment and sleep on her couch. And I did that for 2 months until I gained this relationship with a home group. And I felt comfortable enough to move back to my mother's house. And that lady taught me the meaning of trust and unconditional love from a sober member of this fellowship. And I grew closer to the power. When I was 1.5 years sober, somebody in the fellowship says, Ronald, you walk around the fellowship talking about how you trust in God and the program works, keep coming back. Why don't you call the state bar and see what's happening with your bar card? I told you guys about how I fear rejection so much, I will just reject myself before I even give you the chance. A year and a half sober, and I hadn't even called the state bar to see if my license had been disbarred. When I called them up, they said, Mr. White, you haven't been disbarred. Your license has been suspended for non-payment of dues, $2,500. If you pay all your back dues, you can get your bar card back. Well, shoot, $2,500 sounded like $25,000 at the time because I had a minimum wage job. But you know something? It's amazing how much money you could save when you're not drinking. Amazing. I saved half of every paycheck that I made for the next 6 months. And I wrote a check for $2,500 addressed to the State Bar of California. And they gave me my bar card back. 3 months later, one of you smarties in the fellowship said, isn't it time for you to start looking for a job as a lawyer, Ronald? Still living in fear, afraid of sending out that resume. You know when you have that gap, you know, where I haven't been practicing law, and I'm wondering, how can I put down a Harbor Light, a Harmony Hall, bookkeeper? By now I'm a legal proofreader for a law firm. How can I explain that, right? Somebody said, trust in God and just put down the jobs you worked at as an attorney. First job I applied for was with the LA County Public Defender's Office. They were interviewing, and they had me in for an interview. These 5 lawyers had me sitting behind a table, and they asked me a bunch of questions, and we got to the end of the interview, and nobody asked me about the resume, and I'm thinking, yeah, I got 5. And this smart-ass lawyer at the end said, Mr. White, we noticed you haven't been practicing law for 2 years. Why not? I said, sir, I'm an alcoholic. I did not expect to say that. I didn't plan it. It just kind of popped out, right? You know, I said, I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober for 2 years. They said, Mr. White, this is a pretty stressful job. Lawyers do a lot of drinking. Don't you think the stresses of this position might make you want to drink again? I said, sir, it was stressful when I was out there. I said, I think God has prepared me to do this job. And they looked at me. I don't think they hear the G word in job interviews. They said, God, who is that? Is that a reference? You know. They don't know. That's my best reference. They said, Mr. White, we'll let you know in 10 days if we can hire you or if we're going to put you on our waiting list. I went home that afternoon. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I got home about noon. About 3 o'clock that same day, I got a call. They said they wanted me in for another interview on Friday, 2 days later. I said, shoot, probably want me to pee in a bottle. But I'm willing. I've been sober for 2 years. I am willing. When I showed up that Friday, they did not have me pee in a bottle. They had me see the head public defender of all Los Angeles County at the time, a guy whose name was Wilbur Littlefield. Mr. Littlefield had me sit on a couch in his office. It was on the top floor of the criminal courts building in downtown Los Angeles. And as I sat on the couch, he just started walking around talking about what public defenders do. And he's strolling around, and I'm fidgeting on the couch like those witnesses used to do on Perry Mason. And I'm sweating, and I'm thinking, come on with the alcohol questions. I'm all prayed up. I was at a meeting the night before. They put me in a prayer circle, right? You know, we take care of each other. I'm ready, right? Mr. Littlefield just stopped talking. And he gave me this funny look. And he walked over to the couch where I sat. And he stuck out his hand and he said, Ron, we'd be proud to have you join our office. I like to remember the way that I felt when he said that. Didn't he know just 2 years before I was stealing my mother's food out her refrigerator, stealing the shoes out of her closet, sleeping on her floor? What is that but a miracle? Alcoholics Anonymous takes broken up pieces of men and women, working through the unselfish men and women who toiled in this fellowship. With the guidance of a loving God, we put the pieces back together again. It was as if each man and woman who sits in this room tonight were standing in the lobby of the Harbor Light Center when I arrived there, more dead than alive, a little piece of a man. And you guys walked up to me. And you put your hand underneath my chin. And you lifted up my head. And even more than that, you wrapped your arms around me. As dirty and as filthy and as nasty as I was, you wrapped your arms around me and you literally loved me back to life. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is not about who's got the best looking suits on, who's got the best pitch from the podium, who's got the most babies, who's got the biggest car out in the parking lot, who's got the biggest bank account. Alcoholics Anonymous is about gaining access to the power. The power that I've come to know that is so great, so good, so forgiving, so loving that it can do anything but fail. 15 years ago, I found myself standing in the delivery room of Kaiser Hospital in West Los Angeles with a pair of scissors in my hand, cutting the umbilical cord on my son, Ronald Jr. No ego. I know I may have had it backwards, but 3 months later, I married the mother of my son, my beautiful wife. It may not be a big deal to nobody else in this room, but the only relationship I had with a woman when I was drinking was I was a trick. And a woman actually wanted to share her life with me. This past May, we found ourselves standing on the balcony overlooking the beach on Waikiki Beach in Hawaii, celebrating our 15th wedding anniversary. See, that's Alcoholics Anonymous. 10 years ago, I found myself standing on the lawn of the White House in Washington, D.C., because I had been invited there by President Clinton, by the President of the United States, because he heard about the work I was doing in my community as a public defender. My congresswoman told him that, and they wanted my input on a federal crime bill they were putting together. Standing on the lawn of the White House. Hell, I was watering the lawn for the dope man. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. I will leave you with this. In October of 1987, on a Sunday morning, my mother was getting ready to go to church. She was dressed in these beautiful church clothes, somewhat like she was on that day that guy Kenny tried to beat me to death. And as she walked out of her bedroom preparing to go to church, she stepped in the doorway of her living room and she just stopped. And she looked around her living room and she just started crying. She started crying because there were a bunch of drunks sitting in her living room. And each one of these drunks were holding a copy of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous in their hand. Because my brothers and I, who had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, had been able to start a Big Book workshop in the same house where we almost drank my mother to death. The tears my mother cried that morning were tears of joy, because of what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous had done for her and her boys. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you for letting me share.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.